So let's go to the way the world works. And it's pretty complex, but I'm going to make it as simple as possible. There are, on a international set of scale, spheres of influence, which are ways in which a country or the political influential of that country, be them just rich people or politically powerful or business powerful people, usually all three, and the government that they control and that controls them is in control of large geographical areas. For instance, we have the Western sphere of influence, which is the United States, Canada, Western Europe, and Australia, and Japan, and South Korea, and Taiwan, that are the main epicenters of this, but they have a greater influence over South America, particularly the US. Some Western European nations control different small Caribbean islands. Then, of course, there's the Western Europe, which is where we get the name Western. Okay, but there's other spheres of influence. The Chinese sphere of influence is mostly China, but they're trying to gain influence in this area. Next to Vietnam and the Philippines, the US, Western, including Australia, Western influence is trying to also have influence over this area. Thus, we have the Vietnam War, right? This has been an ongoing struggle. Today, it's Taiwan right here. They're fighting over Taiwan. The Philippines is involved. If you're not really paying attention to the news, you wouldn't even know that this is happening. But it's the Pacific sphere of influence battle, which has yet to cause bloodshed this decade at least, but is real hot. Then we have two more. The Saudi Arabian sphere of influence, the Saudi princes, they control the oil basically, and they have lots of money. And their sphere of influence is all the Middle East, North Africa, and all of Islamic Africa, which kind of is half of Nigeria and kind of wibbles and wobbles around here. So they control this whole region. Well, Israel is actually part of the Western sphere of influence. Um, Now, you might think that Palestine is part of the Saudi power of influence, but it's not. Iran is the next sphere of influence. They spherically influence this region, not only themselves, but all of these. And they're also conflicting with the Russian sphere of influence. So this is kind of like a border between those two. The Iranians and the Saudis hate each other. So the Saudis are attacking via Hamas, right, and other terrorist organizations, are like Hezbollah and just various others, supporting them with missiles so they can attack Israel, which is part of the Western sphere of influence, because they're upset that the Saudis and the Western sphere of influence have become mutually understanding. Um, Especially under Trump, that is one major thing that Trump did. Obama was trying to cozy up to the Iranian sphere of influence. Trump switched that to the Saudi Arabian sphere of influence, and the Iranians are mad. And that is why they have doubled down on Israel, because Biden is also a very strong Israel supporter. Um, Trump was supporting Israel and Saudi Arabia. Biden is mostly just supporting Israel. And then we have the current tragedy for both sides, honestly, that is going on here in the Middle East. Not good stuff. Uh, some there are terrorists that have done bad things, that are in Gaza, that are doing bad things and whatnot, and there's lots of civilians. There are a lot of troubles with the Israeli military in their expansions, but it's a fight between the Iranian sphere of influence and the Western, supported by the Saudi Arabians are actually supporting the Western because they support Israel. That's what made Iran so mad, is that Israel and Saudi Arabia, the West and Saudi, were not fighting anymore. So it made Iran mad. and that's what we got. What we have there. Down here we have Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, which is trying to form its own sphere of influence. It used to be firmly under the Western sphere of influence, right? Under colonialism. That's what colonialism is, sphere of influence. And so the Africans are becoming less reliant and less under the influence of Western, although it's still up for grabs. And then we had where the Russians and the Chinese were trying to have their sphere of influence over here, causing Zimbabwe to be formed out of Rhodesia, communist revolutions that they led back when they were communists. They still have their sphere of influence, but the political parties have changed, but it's still the whole nation state having a sphere of influence. Now, Russia is trying to have more of a sphere of influence in here because it's really a battleground. Saudis have the north, but non-Muslims are very hesitant to form, really be under the sphere of influence of a very Islamic state. Uh, this is somewhat along religious lines. India has its own sphere of influence, but it also, of course, used to be under the Western sphere of influence. And it's next to Iran and China. It's kind of in between state, which is gaining its own, even faster than Africa, its own influence, but is still, under the influence of others. So it's having to fight for that sphere of influence. Over here, of course, Russia's sphere of influence is conflicted with West. We have Ukraine war, right? Where the West and Russia's sphere of influence, Russia wanted to greatly expand their sphere of influence to include this entire giant country, because they already have it under Belarus. And they were seeing these other countries, Estonia, Finland, and everybody starting to become under the Western sphere of influence instead of them, which they've historically been under. And that's what caused the war. And so right now there are thousands of people dying for sphere of influential control because the rich people in Russia want the resources that are found here, lots of minerals and whatnot that they found here. Also, it's a very large farm. Ukraine is basically one giant farm because it's the breadbasket that's been feeding because it has such productive land. The West, of course, does not want Russia to have sphere of influence over this area because of not only the minerals and everything, but also because the Ukrainians themselves don't want to be under Russian sphere of influence because they see it as more limiting and they want to be more Western. And that's what they desire. And Russia is saying, you're not allowed to have what you desire, right? Which, of course, is unjustifiable. But the reality is, it's your sphere of influence right here, which is turned out into an actual war. Over here with China, it is not an actual war right now, thankfully. And that's the state of the world right now. Spheres of influence been going on forever. It keeps turning, and that's the end of it, right?